In a recent visit to the Whitechapel Gallery in London, Jasna came across a book about ruins. The book speaks of modernity through ruins, of ruin lust, of the long history of this affinity, of the long history of this enthusiasm for ruins, for military and industrial ruins, for distant ruins. There was an image of a ruin in Beirut on the front page. She tried to understand why her reaction to that image was so different to her reactions to the photographs of ruins of her own town. She tried to imagine her own ruins as the recipients of those affinities. Would an image of a ruin from her city once adorn the front page of a book in the Whitechapel Gallery? And if so, what kind of translation, would that image be performing? She imagined a ruined building on which was inscribed one letter, one vowel, or a house on which were inscribed 4 letters, 4 consonants. And she attempted through mindfulness meditation to direct the power of romanticism and transfer these attributes onto the images of her own town. But the images in her head resisted. They refused to become sublime. They remained rude, crude, and raw. The sublime, she thought, surely demands some distance, some unreality. Or is that what pastness brings with it? For example, the remains of socialist buildings and monuments seems to willingly submit to this transfer of attributes. All the magnificence of modernity, its desires and failures, lined up neatly. Smoothly and seamlessly, these attributes clung to the existing discourse, to the exciting discourse of this long history of the fragment and the fragile remain. She collected images of her city online. She spied on the émigré blog Vukovar and posted hundreds of photographs on Facebook. When I lived there, it looked like this to me, although it didn't, she said. She asked herself whether it was of historical significance that her life had splintered into fragments. Did fragmentation have different categories depending on the intentions of the fragmentee? If the fragment were truly a symbol of modernity, then she was indeed truly modern. Does a fragmented city become a radically critical city due to its formal qualities? Neither theoretically, nor disarticulatedly, nor sublimely. Subliminally, she thought. Subliminally, she thought. She wondered about fake ruins that had decorated the gardens of the great in the past. Once she'd walked in the Viennese gardens and viewed the Habsburgs' ancient Roman ruins. She'd even written about the Habsburgs' obsession with fake ruins, although they served to illustrate a continuous civilizational lineage. She imagined she was flying in a time capsule where no atmospheric elements could reach her. No gravitational pull applied to her, and she landed in Vukovar, or Sarajevo, in 2321, and she visited the library, the museum. The capsule resembled the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, a comic that she and her brother had loved, and which featured as one of its superheroes her, the Invisible Woman. In her case, the Invisible Woman had the power to stop time. In 700 years' time, the archaeologists might find debris of bricks and mortar mixed up with the remains of pigs, machines, and bones. Do bones petrify? Do they become part of the landscape, like fossils? They say that ruins remove us from the flow of time. That sounds comforting, she thought, to be removed from the flow of time, so disconnected, so liberated from the roughness, the inertness, the obstinance of objects that stand, unmoved, unmoving, immobile, immovable assets. Renovated assets, she thought, and remembered her friend Mira. Who renovated them, she wondered. Pursuant to the list of priority for reconstruction and housing in 2013, the priority list of Section 8, subclauses 1, 2, 3, and 4 Of the Areas of Particular Government Concern Act, the list of priority is established for the municipality where the petitioner is petitioning for housing in accordance with the method of housing for the donation of construction materials for the repair, reconstruction, or extension of a family home, or the construction of a family home on a construction site owned by the petitioner in brackets E. In a recent visit to her hometown, she sat under a tree on the banks of the Danube and met Miro, her childhood friend. It had been exactly 20 years since they had last met. 20 years earlier in Zagreb, they cooked, collected vintage clothing from the Red Cross, and watched gay porn. He, all excited, she all curious. That's how they do it, she thought. A year ago, he'd returned from Leipzig, and now, in a renovated family home, he grew tomatoes, made apricot jam, and still lived in the closet. On her departure, he gave her a jar of apricot jam, very sweet, with a touch of bitterness. She thought it was very nice. In the library of the Hague Tribunal, she came across a book. The book was called The Graves. It was written by Eric Stover, and the black and white photographs were by Gilles Perez. Alongside the photographs, there was some text. The forensic anthropologist William Hageland appears in the text. Hageland, according to the author, wore hats in the style of Indiana Jones and smoked cigars. Was it this man? Or this one? As she sat in a cafe in The Hague, she read. Early one September morning in 1996, William Hageland left the eastern Bosnian town of Kalesija in his white Land Rover and headed into farmlands along the banks of the Drina River. His greying beard glistened in the rosy glow of the cab, and the residue of a night of whiskey and unsettling dreams lingered in the cross-hatching of tanned skin underneath his pale blue eyes. Speeding through the empty streets, he rummaged through the glove compartment and fished out his first cigar of the day. Jasna was aware of the idea that language both described and constructed reality, so the abundance of adjectives and pronouns in the previous passage produced a cognitive dissonance between the Dr. Hageland she knew in her capacity at the tribunal and Dr. Hageland who was here depicted. The following passage seemed to her far more appropriate. Bill Hageland was no stranger to the world of the dead. He specialized in taphonomy, a rather esoteric field of study, which attempts to understand the interaction of the physical elements, earth, water, wind and fire, to name a few, on human remains after death. By 1990, when he finished his PhD, he had already caught the attention of one of the profession's foremost practitioners, Clyde Snow. Clyde Snow, as she found out, was known as the Sherlock Holmes of bones, and used to say, "Bones make great witnesses. They speak softly, but they never forget, and they never lie," which was recently quoted by A.L. Wiseman. The interdisciplinary field of forensic anthropology and forensic archaeology is one of the fastest growing areas of social science, and it achieved its affirmation in international law and criminal investigations in the 90s, when due to international political events there was a rise in demand for expert knowledge in these fields. Dr. Hageland used to say, "The dead are speaking to us. We are interpreting for the dead. The dead are telling us the same story that the living are telling the investigators. I talk for the dead people, and not for the tribunal." Not for the tribunal. Dr. Hageland also wrote books, but he stuck to academic writing. Many years later he lost his memory, and although he had written many books, he no longer remembered them. Wednesday, 24 July 2013, open bracket, open session, close bracket, open bracket, the accused entered court, close bracket, -- upon commencing at 9:33 a.m. This is the case IT-09-92-T, the prosecutor versus Ratko Mladic, witness William Hageland, open bracket, resumed, close bracket. Question. Doctor, do you accept this part of your testimony given in the Popovich case as accurate? If that's what it, if that's what it said, that's what I said. I almost want to say something, but I don't think I can. I don't know if I should say something, but I'm having a lot of memory loss, and it's really difficult for me to remember things and bring them up, so... Question. Is there any specific reason why you are suffering from a memory loss at this moment? Is there any illness involved? Answer. Well, this is... this is... Yes, I could have... Answer. I stand by my previous testimonies. Right here, I'm not standing by them very much. Question. In the Popovich case, you said it was hard for you to believe that people on the ground did not know that this was a criminal investigation. Answer. Is there an answer to this in my other testimony? Question. Yes, there is. Answer. Okay, I stand by that. Question. But today, you don't remember what you answered, correct? Answer. It's very wavery for me to make these kinds ... to answer these. I stand by these because that's when my memory was well, okay? Question. I don't see much use of this cross-examination. Answer. Mr. McCluskey, Mr. President, I ... I don't ... and I'm not a doctor, but I ... I think it's ... if Mr. Hagland, if we could consult him on that, I ... you know, none of our memories are perfect. He could try, and if it's obviously impossible, then of course there would be ... we would not be left with any other option. Answer. Mr. McCluskey, I ... we ... we must take people as we find them. We find ourselves here in 2013 because the accused was on the run for several years. And no one can be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect witness. If Dr. Hagland continues to try, I will support him. If he has had enough, I ... I will stand down. But we don't have any perfect witnesses. No one has a perfect memory. All we can do is try. Question. Mr. Lukic, in the Stakic case in front of this tribunal, Judge Schoenberg ruled that everybody has the right to run, and it has nothing to do with this cross-examination. Judge Ori, everyone has the right to... Mr. Lukic, to run. Judge Ori, to run. Mr. Lukic, and to hide. Judge Ori, yes, I don't think that Mr. McCluskey said that the accused had no right to run, but that it has consequences. Yes. Question. Mr. McCluskey, exactly. I understand why someone runs. Answer. Mr. Lukic. But again, it has nothing to do with this cross-examination, and I don't think that we can finalize this cross-examination. That is my true belief. She wondered how it was possible to remember at all if her original perception was already distorted, and the continual recounting kept changing the form of her memory, as well as fixing its details. She was aware of various mnemotic techniques. One of the simplest memory exercises was to connect each memorable fact with a particular movement. The method worked particularly well with lists of facts that needed to be stored in long-term memory. But now, when she tried to recollect the exact sequence of precisely defined movements and their corresponding meanings, the only thing she could remember was the sequence of movements. Movements that had once belonged to a piece of data, for example, to the Croatian Ban Mažuranić, and now were carried beyond history, separated from their reference, floating remains of a forgotten education. Maybe the information was not important, and the movements were, as she had recently remembered that Ban Mažuranić, in his capacity as a linguist, while compiling the first Croatian-German dictionary, introduced a number of new words into the Croatian language. For example, the word sladoled, which means ice cream. And truly, what a wonderful word, she thought, although she wasn't sure whether the fact that Ban Mažuranić had to invent the word meant that there had been no ice cream in Croatia previously, or that the German word was used. However, in German you say just ice, which means ice. Maybe the Hungarian word was used, as she had read about that recently too. Ban Hedevari wanted everyone to speak Hungarian. But in Hungarian, at least according to Google, ice cream is fagylalait, which she'd never heard before in Croatia, although her hometown was well known for its many nationalities, which included many Hungarians. She wondered whether anyone still used dictionaries, and how quickly new words got introduced. Once she read that the Oxford English Dictionary introduced a new word after it had been in print for 3 years. The last update was in March 2014, when 360 new words were introduced. Among them stood out the words bookwoman, a word Google doesn't yet understand, and the word ethnopoetics, which Google has known since 2009. But the word herbicide was still not included in the Oxford English Dictionary, although Wikipedia's entry for herbicide clearly lists as exemplar Vukovar, Sarajevo, Zimbabwe, and New Orleans. Jasna was fascinated by the connection between words, memory, images, and death, so she was delighted with her coinage, mnemicide. Later she saw that although the word mnemicide was not yet known to Google nor Wikipedia, it appears in texts related to Iraq. Encouraged by the fact that memory side was recognized in the fields of political science and trauma theory, she decided to write a letter to M. Sharif Basuni with certain recommendations in order to avoid the problems of memory loss, as in the case of Dr. Hagland, but also the erasure of memory, or the dissolution of the signals of the past. Dear M. Sharif Basuni, R.E. Effective Database. I am writing to you as the first chair of the Commission of Experts established pursuant to Security Council 780 to investigate violations of international humanitarian law in the former Yugoslavia, and the Commission's Special Rapporteur on gathering and analysis of facts. There are several things I would like to bring to your attention concerning the data collection practices of the Tribunal. The databases, I believe, need to be updated to reflect the increasingly rapid obliteration of detail occurring over the last 20 years. In order to do so, I would suggest a system of emotional factography where for each item of inventory, an affect would accompany it. The emotions would be entered in alphabetical order, beginning with agony through joy and vulnerability and ending in zeal. Once these have been mapped and entered into the database, it will be far easier to begin the process of reconstruction, although this will never provide more than a fragmentary narrative held together by the projection of a possibility. Yours faithfully, Jasna X, Support Assistant, Court Support Service Section, ICTY, Churchill Line 1, 2517 JW, Den Haag. Jasna was on the roof of the Hague Tribunal. She was having a cigarette break and thinking of Gotha. She wondered if the past was over yet. She was suffering from low-level chronic grief, which made her body resistant to movement. The result of this was an increase in body mass and an unremarkable loneliness. I'm dealing with ordinary trouble, she thought, and I'm trying to feed myself regularly. I eat chicken for protein, and sometimes peas and beans. She wondered how she could document the life of this person. She could use writing, of course, oral histories, personal narratives, testimonies, memories, Reparative, without commitment, without recourse to conversion, she wondered about the emergence of memory and the organization of happiness. The silk in my legs spun a soft shroud with every step. A tactical approach to laying traps for me and for them. It took a while to perfect the technique. The lines were particularly hard to lay on fragile land, but I tried. First I landed in Amsterdam, or was it Leiden? The Dutch at the time were happy to see us liberal. They provided counselling and organised squats in villas, on canals, on rivers. Even the police said of my silver dress how beautiful it was. Still, I found ways to distance myself from them and from me. The silk in my legs spun a cocoon dispersed across a wide terrain. I was careful to leave points of passage to navigate from one remaining kin to the next. I engulfed the rest in a white web with thin threads leading back to my departure point. It had shifted in the meantime, some dead, some wrinkled, some fled. Now we're paid to remigrate, so we collect our sticky lines again and unsettle the web. The silk in my legs. The silk in my legs. The silk in my legs.
Dear Sir or Madam,
The silk in my legs.
this letter is one of interest concerning prospective employment with your organization in response to your advertisement for the recruitment for the election observation mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina, political analyst / election analyst / media analyst position, in which I believe I could use the expertise I have developed whilst working in various international organizations over the past 20 years. I lived in Croatia until 1991 when I moved to the Netherlands. After more than 20 years of living abroad, I would like the opportunity to work in the countries of the former Yugoslavia for both professional and personal reasons. I strongly believe that supporting the stability in the countries of the former Yugoslavia is a prerequisite for sustainable peace and democratic and economic development, and I am confident that I could contribute to the continuation of these processes. I have both professional experience and extensive training in relation to document management, analysis, translation, and in the area of peace, campaigning, and conflict prevention, which I have gained both working for the past 15 years at the United Nations International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, as well as previously in the NGO sector. Since 1999, I have been employed at the UNICTY, initially at the Office of the Prosecutor, where I provided information, data management, language assistance to investigators, lawyers, analysts, and since 2007 at the Court Support Service section of the Registry.
The silk in my legs. The silk in my legs.
Besides Bosnian / Croatian / Serbian open brackets, my mother tongue close brackets, I am proficient user of English and Dutch. In addition, I have solid working knowledge of German and French. My proficiency in various languages and the knowledge of political, social and historical situation of the countries of the former Yugoslavia have enabled me to provide efficient support to various projects at the Office of the Prosecutor and the Court Support Service section through identification, analysis and classification of various information used in investigations and trials at the ICTY. My language skills and professional training have also enabled me to contribute to the institutional goals. With my strong, analytic, empathic and communication skills, for years already I have been successfully providing psychosocial and informal support to the victims and witnesses called to testify before the UNICTY.
The silk in my legs.
Similarly, due to my computer competence, I have been able to improve the document processing as well as the retrieval of information both at the OTP and the CSSS.
The silk in my legs. I would like to stress the silk in my legs.
that my ability to operate in time-critical conditions and the experience and competence I have in working in a multicultural setting have been a valuable asset in my working environment. Please find more detailed information on my professional background in the attached application form, and my curriculum vitae stored under my profile in your election experts database. Should you require any additional information, please do not hesitate to contact me. Yours faithfully, J.U.N. ICTYM 025 Churchill Pine 12517 JW Den Haag. YYY to MFYYY. Exact title of your post. Indexing product, computer system information, supervisor, information support unit. Name of employer. UN ICTY. Address of employee. Churchill Pine 12517 JW Den Haag.
She was convinced that however miserable and challenging an occurrence might be, it was always necessary to overcome the present moment, withdraw from the indicators of time and delve deeply and squarely into the past. There, in all fairness, it seemed there could be a question or two that promised an answer. At least the questions were always there, even if altered not only by the passage of time but by the tricks one's own mind plays on the proper storage of past facts. Factity as such was not a problem. It was not always difficult to fix facts in place, however the exact position of their location was not necessarily accurate. Would it really matter if the minutiae of the event were not solid, that they would fade had not at some point during the journey her own mind said, "Enough. Now you shall rest here, couched and cushioned on both sides by the soft tissue of my forgetfulness."
How far below sea level is the Netherlands? 0031628459987. ICTY is 5 meters below sea level, and the apartment in Amsterdam, as the one in The Hague, is a few meters above. 0031628459987. This is officially known as geographic depression. Smiley.
She enjoyed her strolls along the seafront. She could look out and imagine there was nothing behind. No dunes, no walls, no dams, no dikes. She could imagine the ocean and its narratives of conversion. I used to be so big. Now look, I am so small. I used to be so wild. Now look, I am so tame. I used to leak from every crack. Now look how sealed and waterproof I am. I used to be so insular. Now look how absorbent I am. I used to be wet. Now I am dry land. Like Catherine Clement, she chose to focus on the gap, not only as a lack, but as a pause from which herself could rise. They would call her dyschronic, unattuned, melancholic. As melancholy denotes a passionate attachment to the past, so even with her eyes fixed on the horizon, what she saw were nutcracker mines, steel girders, hedgehogs and iron ore. In front the horizon, black from the ships, to the right the pier. Skeletal it stands over the crazy winds, extending over the North Sea on stilts, a sky sombre as if the sediment of rock stands above it, pushing it steadily down. One wonders how the wind gets through. Are there cracks in the celestial wall? The clue lies in the waves, otherwise they would be still. They would not budge, nor bulge, nor break in rhythmic pattern on the brittle stilts, powdery and stern. Stockpiles, store supplies, 1,000,000 metric tons of steel in the frigid waters, bubbling red, the humans. Men stream, boats flounder, plumes of smoke and trails of ships black the horizon and vaporize to coincide with the high tide. Stockpiles, store supplies, a reservoir of archaic horrors. Suspend the representation of vapor, suspend the vapor, suspend the frigid sea, the language and the metaphor. There was red in the image. It was an explosive red to match the red of the red planet or the red mountain or the red sea and the blood moon. It was webbed, the image, live and streamed for the time and leisure of the good lifers, the one who stroll or run or surf and take care of their self. she thought about the possibility of migrating again. Where could she go to this time?
Possibly Arusha. It seemed if she could go as far away as possible from the death of her dog and immerse herself again in the everyday love's dying, she might find a little space to breathe outside of herself. Pain, she thought, was overrated. It always came in a number of ways, flowing in waves and making reality real, in spite of Lacan. For realness was what she craved, you see. It was through fantasy or the unreal that she understood the pain of the world, a vision she had, and from a dream she had, of herself on top of a mountain, on a pinnacle, alone, facing outwards, looking outwards at the great unknown, looking at the sublime and seen from behind in a top hat. She would look into the distance like the buffalo in the New York Natural History Museum diorama, heroic and brave, looking at the beyond of territories unknown, if not to man, then at least to her, and Jean-Luc Picard. There she was, atop a hill, screaming the pain of the world, because in her mind she was the conductor of pain, it was hers to conduct. Some might say, a Jesus complex, like Michael Jackson or Bono. Most of the time she tried to help herself conduct the pain through various solutions. She found one of the most solutions to be 1 part liquor, 2 parts beer. After a few of these, her feelings would finally rise to the heights of euphoric empathy, and her brandy-infused mouth would open, like the character in The Fifth Element, and she would perform an inverse scream instead of all the sound exploding outwards. She would gather the fear of the universe and channel it inwards. Then, and only then, did it seem like her blubbery and inflated body was satiated. Thankful for the inebriation, she was thinking of migrating. She could possibly go to Arusha, plenty of pain there. She wondered if African pain was different to European, and whether East European counted for less or for more, or was an equilibrium on the pain count of the world. She was thinking of migrating. This would allow several options. She could remigrate. In this case, she would relieve the Dutch pension scheme of her old age, and she would return to her country of origin, take herself back to her point of departure, with an allowance of €412 a month until she died. She did not know when she was going to die, but presumably the Dutch pension scheme did, and had calculated that it was more cost-efficient to have her paid to age not in the Netherlands. They would prefer her to live to a ripe old age not in the Netherlands. She had just hit 50, not an easy birthday for anyone. Even Dutch women found their 50th birthday hard, but nobody was offering them money to leave. No such privilege for the Dutch golden age. 412 times 7.5, 3,090 Croatian kuna. Really not much. And interestingly, this amount was offered to a range of different countries, including
Bosnia-Herzegovina, Greece, Italy, Cape Verde, Croatia, Macedonia, Morocco, Portugal, Serbia, Slovenia, Spain, Suriname, Tunisia, Turkey, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Greece, Italy. For this amount of money, she would be held responsible and would forfeit her Dutch nationality. Dutch women had no such option even after their 50th birthday. They were not offered the opportunity to go back home, although many of them wanted to go home. You see, Europe was now full of 50-year-old women who wanted to go home. I would like to go home now. I think I will go home. There is no place like 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 there is no place like home. There is no place there is no there is no place like home. 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 There is no place there is no place like home. 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 There is no place like home.
The mechanism of International Criminal Tribunal's mechanisms has launched a small exhibition of select material contained in the archives of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, entitled ICTY, Looking Back. The exhibition was prepared by the Mechanism Archives and Records Section, in brackets MARS, to mark the 25th anniversary of the founding of the ICTY. The exhibit features a fraction of the wealth of material contained in the ICTY archives, including select copies of judicial records, photographs, publications, and artwork.
The funding had run out. The drive for reparative justice had not given fruit. The bills were too high. The building too big for just one war or two. The short-term contracts a drain on resources. The union defunct. It had closed on the 31st of December, and since then there were numerous farewell parties, farewell drinks, farewell lunches, and farewell receptions, with all the parties taking part and moving on. There was singing and dancing from all corners of the world. To mark the end, it was time to move on to Essen, to Arusha, or to Vienna, to stay put here alone, turn the World Forum into a museum, or move to Vienna as a librarian. It's empty now. The corridors, left, right, up the stairs, left, a door, behind the door, a room. Down the stairs, there are no collars. The wall is without collars. The door is without collars. The coats are missing. The people are missing. The flat was empty. All the flats were empty. The house was empty. All the houses were empty. The chairs were empty. All the chairs were empty. The toilets were empty. All the toilets were empty. The ashtrays were empty. All the ashtrays were empty. The stairs were empty. All the stairs were empty. The rooms were empty. All the rooms were empty. The bedrooms were empty. All the bedrooms were empty. The couch was empty. All the couches were empty. The cupboard was empty. All the cupboards were empty. The coffee machine was empty. All the coffee machines were empty. The armchair was empty. All the armchairs were empty. The flower pot was empty. All the flower pots were empty.
All who died, I didn't say goodbye to them. And all who were born, I didn't get to know them.
00316284599987.
I started mourning for her only after 11 years.
00316284599987.
I often used to imagine that I was on top of a mountain, crying, howling, screaming at the top of my voice. But the Netherlands is flat. There are no mountains.
She enjoyed the thought of the ICTY becoming a museum. Museums generally have the ability to freeze and contain the emanation of objects. The memory becomes objectified and put in place outside of the living. The objects are stripped of their power, their agency no longer active. They rest, plucked from their surroundings and smeared in a coating of smooth narrative. She would make a good museum curator, a good museum attendant, a good curator's assistant. She would fill in the forms, meticulously tag each object, enter into the database its condition, its function, its description. Each find would be handled with love and with care, put to rest in the vaults, dusted in the cabinets, she would say, so that we do not forget. She would inject some drama, she would say, lest it ever happen again. She would emote the words, not just aloud, the dry vocabulary of taxonomy. She would have exclusive access to handle the objects. She and a few chosen others would have the power of touch, enabling her to revisit the lived experience through contact magic and sympathetic magic alike. Oh, it's been a long time since you read Tausig, but now it starts to make sense. The mimetic faculty merges with the affective capacity to reconnect to the neural network of trauma loops, especially in the clothing items. They were so close to the bodies. She would look to the Adidas trainers that had been buried for 20 years and wonder, would they have been equally well preserved had the feet that once wore them been strolling? She marveled at the quality of the making. Leather, it seems, keeps better than skin underground, she would say. I would like to present to you these marvels of trauma and testimony. I would like to rename the archive and think of them as a form of intimacy, a way for me to reveal my empathic faculties and find common ground with our species. You see, these exhibits hold not only material evidence, forensic evidence, object-based narratives, but now displayed, they are also curiosities for your arousal, for your sense of all that is just in the world. Every object here is now elevated well beyond its modest beginnings, active and mobilized, emotive, charged and loaded in transitional effect. No longer a wooden rifle, but a document, surely, not thought of as an object of contemplation when first used by the men for target practice or decoy practice, for traps and stickiness, tackiness, and cross-species elimination. A museum of dead matter, she thought, and chuckled at the morbid pun and the passive noun. She wrote a sonnet.
I would like to present to you and me a kind of archive, a collection of kinds, containing marvels of trauma and testimony, an inanimate intimacy to blow our minds. I would ask you to rename your sense of dread, administer the memory of loss and gain, and see in these objects a life now dead, distant, departed, and drained of air and blood and sorrow and excess, avoiding more damage, more harm, in positive action to count the success of calculating the lesser crime, emphasize a way for us marked as human, to empathize away those marked as human. I would like to present to you a kind of archive, a collection of crimes. I would like to present to you a kind of archive, a collection of crimes. I would like to present to you a kind of archive, a collection of. She took out of her pocket a packet of Marlboro Lights. She covered the lighter with her hand to protect it from the northern wind. Black scarf around her neck, head tilted forwards, she puffed with great concern. Vienna was nice. Vienna was empty. It was close. It had a library. She liked books. She liked moving. She was stuck. No good being stuck, she thought, and immediately began to calculate the possibilities that arise from the condition of adhesion to adhere, somehow allowed for a new substance to be amalgamated into an old one. This in itself was not a matter distasteful. It was only a matter of making sure that that which adheres does not solidify. It was time to move.
45, bag, clothes 46, bag, bed linens 47, bag, bed linens 48, bag, bed linens 49,
Library assistant G5.
DVDs 50.
Library assistant G5. 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 Library assistant G5.
This position is located in the United Nations Library Service, Vienna. With assigned authority, the library assistant will be responsible for the following duties: perform functions, conduct research, perform cataloguing, modify records, perform collection, support staff, assist in outreach, provide support, perform actions, by requirements, perform function, participate in production, provide delivery, provide support. Mirror 95, mirror 96, mirror 97, mirror 98, mirror 99, wooden stand 100, red armchair 101, red armchair 102, wooden armchair.
I have knowledge of library operations.
White chair 105, white
I have the
chair
ability
106,
to undertake research.
white chair 108, wooden chair 109,
I maintain records and I retrieve materials with speed.
wooden chair 112, TV
I show pride in work and in achievements. I demonstrate
lamp 115,
mastery of subject
lamp
matter.
116, lamp 117, dishwasher 118.
I am conscientious and efficient.
Home utensils
I am motivated by professional rather than personal concerns.
122.
I show persistence when faced with problems.
Assist in ensuring completeness.
I remain calm in situations. I'm committed to implementing the goal of gender equality.
Provide technical support before
I work collaboratively. I solicit input.
participate in production.
I am willing to learn from others.
Administrative support.
I support. I establish and I maintain partnerships with clients. I gain their trust and respect. I identify clients' needs. I consider all those to whom services are provided to be clients, and I seek to see things from clients' point of view.
I am conscientious and I am efficient in meeting commitments, observing deadlines and achieving results. I am motivated by professional rather than personal concerns. I show persistence when faced with difficult problems or challenges. I remain calm in stressful situations.
If she were to walk out into the landscape while not documenting the walk, would it count?
This ever so private, so intimate, so underlooked a walk no one ever sees, a non-selfied walk, a non-webcammed walk, a simple action of one foot followed by the other in an afternoon, an evening in a twilight, a civil twilight on February the 24th, 2018, in Scheveningen, the wind slow, the sea oily, the sun sparse, the birds surprised by their own shrieks. I have migrated, I have not migrated, I will migrate, I will stay put, I will get stuck in the storm, in the clear skies of the dead zone, and when this cubic meter of land and air solidifies, I will be found fossilized, me, in the sand, the bird in the thick oxygen that no one can no longer breathe, the air like resin, enclosed in a slice of the northern seascape. All that is fluid turns to stone, she thought. Rock hard, my origin calcified my bones, petrified the signals that travel through the slate reluctant to receive. Give me a stuffed parrot any day, a domiciled parakeet, a specimen or two of zircon will do for my microbes and I to creep, slither, gush and repeat. No vowels, no order of words, no tenses, no questions, no articles. Defined by my natural history, I refuse to emote in unmarked manner. I pause, menstrually, engendered fashion, embracing a pool of public neurosis. I will take my place in the genre of historic despair, and rest in the memory of melancholy lonely. I will speak to my liver, my kidneys, and my spleen. You think we share commonality over livers and lungs? You think you produce a common humanness through a shared biology? Not so, not ever so, you damaged and defunct funeral director, you bloodless bulldozer and half-witted earth digger. I share more life and form with a single cell, with a mulberry tree, with a cucumber than with you, she said. All the way from The Hague to Semelzi. It was sticky between the objects and the words. It was sticky between Vukovar to Amsterdam, between the materials set for traps, set for damage, and the fingers between the seafront, the riverbed, and the library. In the book of German poetry, the glue was in the gift, in the shirt, in the green jade earrings, in the sunsets on the Danube and the moonrise on the Amstel, in the platform shoes and the tide, in the silver dress, and in the boxes and bags in the €412. The glue was tacky and strung between the donor and her, in loops of a sticky substance, in the horizon line of the northern sea and the eastern city, in the mudscapes and the sand dews, under the Wi-Fi and through the wires inside the smartphones, on the FaceTimes and in the Snapchats. The glue was in the long shadows, in the webcams and in the cloud. It was attached to the hair, on the toenails, and the components of the judges, the cleaners, the security staff, and the interpreters, all over the keyboards. I adhere to the buses, and I adhere to the winds, and I adhere to the atmosphere, she said. 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 Thank you.